A 17-year-old boy stunned the globe on Britain's Got Talent in 2012. The brilliance in Jonathan Antoine's voice was unmatched. His fame was based on a 28-year-old secret. At the age of 4, he was the target of bullying. Youngsters tossed snacks at him. His teachers discovered him sobbing by himself. Then came the diagnosis that made all the difference. Weight and shyness weren't the only factors that affected Jonathan. The reason he felt so different throughout his life was explained by something deeper. Your heart would be broken by the truth he eventually disclosed. Jonathan Antoine was born in Chigwell, Essex, on January 13, 1995. It appeared to be a peaceful, affluent area to grow up in from the outside. In his world, however, things were different. Jonathan developed a special musical skill at a young age. Only 1 in 10,000 persons had perfect pitch, which he had by the age of 6. Even though his gift was uncommon, nobody seemed to care. Instead, Jonathan endured such severe bullying during his school days that teachers frequently discovered him sobbing by himself. He used to soothe himself by humming lengthy tunes. He would silently write whole songs in his mind at the darkest times, according to what his mother Julie later said. He was exhibiting symptoms of sadness by the time he was 8 years old, but his brain was doing something remarkable. He could listen to an opera once and retain every detail. He was eventually diagnosed with a type of musical savant condition by doctors. Less than 1 person out of every 1,000 who has it. His battle with weight had started even earlier. At the age of 4, food was the only thing that made him feel better. He was 40 pounds heavier than he should have been by the age of 5. By the age of 6, he weighed 95 pounds, which was more than double the typical weight for his age. During lunch, children hurled food at him and called him derogatory things. Additionally, he became more reliant on food for solace the more they mocked him. Jonathan weighed 154 pounds at the age of 10. His mother made every effort. She even took out 2 mortgages on their home to pay for therapy. But nothing worked. A disease known as trauma-induced hyperphagia, which causes excessive weight gain and affects only around 2% of bullied children, is what experts would subsequently diagnose him with. When his voice was heard, nobody was prepared for it. Mrs. Williams, a replacement music instructor, was holding a regular choir audition when he was 10 years old. When Jonathan opened his mouth, everyone heard something that didn't seem real, despite his best efforts to blend in with the other children. He had an adult tenor's tone and strength in his voice. According to Mrs. Williams, it sounded like Pavarotti trapped in a kid's body. Jonathan's voice was able to reach a frequency range that was significantly higher than what most kids could handle, according to an examination of that initial tape. What was even more unexpected was that he possessed a natural vibrato, which often takes 20 years to master for singers. He was singing adult-oriented solos in a matter of weeks. There was no need for a microphone. His voice was loud enough to fill a 2,000-seat hall, with a decibel level of 95. It was subsequently referred to as one of the most significant discoveries in British music instruction. Jonathan went to the Stratford and East London Music Festival when he was 15. His height was slightly over 5 feet, and his weight was 298 pounds. He competed against 47 other singers, many of whom had years of professional training. Victoria Sterling, 17, was his fiercest opponent and had previously performed at the Royal Opera House. Jonathan decided to perform Nessun Dorma. Nearly 2,000 individuals had crammed themselves into a 1,200-person capacity by the time he was done. He received more than 4 minutes of standing ovation from the audience. Sir David Wilcox, one of the judges, awarded him the best score in the festival's history, 98 out of 100. In addition to a £2,500 award, he received an invitation to record. Not only that, but he experienced cheering instead of jeering for the first time. In the same year, he was accepted into the junior program at the Royal Academy of Music. That moment was unique. More than 2,800 people applied, but only 23 were selected. Despite having felt nervous and throwing up twice before the audition, Jonathan's performance was almost flawless. According to his academy teacher, his voice sounded like it belonged to a 25-year-old who had received training. The school typically cost more than £8,000 annually, but after his mother demonstrated how difficult their financial situation was, the tuition was waived. Jonathan's training took up most of his weekends. 4 hours of theory, 2 hours of performance coaching, and 6 hours of vocal technique are covered. Because of his appearance, he was initially disregarded by the other students. However, 3 months later, he was chosen to play the Magic Flute's lead part, becoming the youngest person in the Academy's lengthy history to do so. Everything started to change in 2011 when Jenny Ewington, Jonathan's high school music instructor, took a risk. Jonathan, who was 17 at the time, was still over 20 stone in weight. With Charlotte Giaconelli, who was 16 years old. Jonathan lacked the confidence Charlotte possessed. Since the age of 8, she had been performing and enjoyed being in the spotlight. Jenny was not speculating. She chose Charlotte because she was confident in her ability to counterbalance Jonathan's strong but reserved voice on stage. Only 15 pupils witnessed their debut duet, The Prayer. Despite the limited space, Jenny knew she had discovered something unique. Charlotte and Jonathan couldn't be more dissimilar. He avoided people and spent hours every day practicing opera. By 16, she had been in more than 30 musicals and cherished every moment of being on stage. However, they had an unusual combination of voices when they sang together. The tenor range of Jonathan's voice was C3 to C5. C4 to C6 was the change in Charlotte's soprano voice. They had a voice coupling that only occurs once every generation, according to a music producer who listened to their early recordings. Behind the scenes, however, things weren't always easy. Charlotte had to constantly prod Jonathan. Occasionally, he would hide in the school restroom during panic attacks that occurred prior to rehearsals. She would locate him, reassure him, and beckon him back to the music room. They began performing at neighborhood gatherings to gain confidence. From February to April of 2012, they performed at 23 different locations, including pubs, churches, retirement homes, and weddings. An Easter service at a nearby church was their first paid job, earning them £50 apiece. At the Epping Forest Country Club, a momentous occasion followed, where they entertained 200 guests at a charity dinner. They were soon approached by talent scouts after the 5-minute standing ovation. They were making £300 a show by April, and 40 additional places were lining up to book them. Even though their repertoire had expanded to 15 songs, The Prayer remained the focal point of each performance. These little performances helped Jonathan get ready for the next step. They were encouraged to try out for Britain's Got Talent by Charlotte. In March 2012, she learned about the tryouts, but Jonathan first turned her down. He didn't want to be ridiculed for his appearance on national television. Charlotte remained persistent. She asked repeatedly for 3 weeks. If he didn't agree, she even threatened to audition by herself. She sent in their application with 13 minutes to spare before the deadline. In her bedroom, the video was shot. Jonathan was scared and was hardly seen on film. Charlotte responded that it was either both or neither when the producers called, indicating that they were only interested in her. At the London Palladium, the audition was set for April 28. Jonathan has never even ridden the bus by himself. Therefore, Charlotte spent the previous evening at his house to ensure that he wouldn't back out. In 2012, Jonathan Antoine had no idea that his life would change forever as he took the stage at Britain's Got Talent. He was only 17. He didn't look like the artists that often win over the judges. He had untidy hair and wore a plain t-shirt. However, millions would be shocked by what transpired next. Simon Cowell made a nasty comment to fellow judge Carmen Electra before Jonathan had even finished singing. When you thought it couldn't get any worse, it did. They captured that comment on camera. It was violent. And that was based only on Jonathan's appearance. However, Jonathan anticipated it. I don't appear like a typical entertainer, he wrote later. I simply wore my regular clothing when I went out. The pre-performance video became one of the most memorable moments in BGT's history. The song The Prayer then started. Andrea Bocelli and Celine Dion made it famous with their strong duet. Jonathan did not select it on his own. Charlotte Giaconelli, his singing partner, and his music instructor Jeanette Brown had been requested to sing it at her wedding. When Jonathan started singing, everything in the room shifted. The audience was up and moving in a matter of seconds. Everyone was in tears. Simon Cowell was stunned. They were approved by all 4 judges. It was more than a strong performance. A breakthrough occurred. Even more startling to everyone was Simon's subsequent response. The man who had just minutes earlier made fun of Jonathan was now likening him to Luciano Pavarotti. "You're going to be a star," he said. He was supported by experts. Vocal maturity beyond Jonathan's years was already evident in his voice. He was believed to possess the control and range of a person twice his age. The performance went viral soon. On March 24, 2012, the footage for the audition was posted. Over 2.6 million people viewed it in a few weeks. It quickly rose to become the world's most watched TV audition. It was covered by worldwide media. People started making Susan Boyle comparisons to Jonathan. The video was shared and hailed as a fantastic narrative by religious leaders such as Pastor Vati Basham. After being bullied as a teenager, Jonathan became a global celebrity in an instant. But it wasn't an easy path. Jonathan has suffered a lot in the past. He was bullied for years because he weighed 280 pounds. At school, he reportedly experienced a psychological breakdown and turned into a recluse. He would hide under a large jumper and never leave the house, according to his mother Tracy. Thus, his appearance on the BGT stage was more than just a show. The outcome was triumphant. It was not the end of the pressure. Jonathan struggled to maintain composure during the semifinals. Even Charlotte was in a frenzy. To manage his dread, however, Jonathan had learned breathing techniques. To calm himself, he had to sit down before he could sing. They once again won over the audience with their rendition of Caruso. Even Simon Cowell acknowledged that they were his favorite act of the entire show at that time. But controversy erupted once more. When Simon advised Jonathan to leave Charlotte and do it alone, it took everyone by surprise. Jonathan didn't think twice. "No," he said. "As a team, we've come here and we're going to stay here," he stated. He was even more respected after that. It was anticipated that they would win the final, but the outcome dashed their expectations. The winner, Ashley Butler and her dog, Pudsey, received 39% of the public vote. Charlotte and Jonathan finished second with 25.8%. It came as a huge shock. Their supporters felt devastated. Many believed that popularity, rather than talent, was now the key. There was no time wasted by Simon Cowell. He negotiated a record-breaking £1 million contract with Jonathan and Charlotte the day after the finale. In September of that year, their debut album, Together, was published and peaked at number 10 on the UK Albums Chart. The release was deliberately scheduled by Simon to coincide with the live performances of the X Factor. While the memory of their performance was still vivid in his mind, he knew they had to strike. Jonathan was dumbfounded. "I still can't believe we're actually creating our own CD," he added. The CD included the songs that had brought them fame, such as Caruso and The Prayer. There were more than 250,000 copies sold. According to Simon, their record would be amazing. Indeed, it was. Perhaps Love was the title of their second album, which was released a year later. It was released on October 14, 2013. Similar to their debut, it peaked at number 5 on the UK chart. But there was a change. The album featured not only classical tunes but also more contemporary renditions. That change made a more serious issue apparent. Charlotte has different desires than Jonathan did. Opera and serious classical music appealed to Jonathan. Charlotte preferred new trends and musical theater. They became too different to ignore. Jonathan received years of classical music training. In 2010, he was even recognized at a provincial festival as the Young Musician of the Year. Alternatively, Charlotte had a background in theater. They struggled behind the scenes, but their second record did well. They made the announcement that they would part ways in early 2014. Both of them attempted to remain optimistic. "We are very excited to return to the recording studio," they stated in a joint statement. However, insiders disclosed that the breakup followed months of disagreements about artistic direction and song selection. Jonathan had also been weakened by touring. He was already in precarious health. Self-confidence and his weight had always been issues for him. According to his mother, he wouldn't even venture outside before to BGT. Following the performance, the stress of appearances, concerts, and media interviews drove him to the breaking point. Jonathan began to experience panic attacks. Charlotte and Jonathan remained a team for 2 years. They have more than 250,000 albums sold. In the UK charts, their debut album, Together, peaked at number 5. In February 2014, however, fans were taken aback. A post went up on the internet. The two were parting ways. Sony had made them an unprecedented offer behind the scenes, simultaneous solo contracts for both. It is rare to find such an offer. Jonathan's CD would be out in October, while Charlotte's would come out in June. The United Statement made an effort to mitigate the damage. After meeting in high school in 2006, they embarked on an amazing journey together. However, they were obviously traveling quickly and in distinct directions. The really pivotal moment occurred when they met with Sony to discuss their third album. Later, Charlotte said that they were unable to reach a consensus. Not even the vision, not the tunes, and not the tone. Jonathan desired to study classical opera more thoroughly. Musical theater was Charlotte's preference. The gap existed. Sony then suggested going it alone. They had decided on a course of action after a month. Charlotte was a swift mover. Solitaire, her debut solo album, was released in July 2014. She also debuted professionally in theater at London's Landor Theatre in February 2015, in the Broadway classic She Loves Me, she played Amalia Balash. It took place between February 4 and March 7. This wasn't merely a professional decision for her. There was a change. At last, she was performing live on stage night after night, doing what she loved. Jonathan's path was rather different. He wasn't confident enough to go right in. He felt terrified. Even at 19, he wasn't convinced he could handle it by himself. It had always been Charlotte who had the stage presence. He gained courage from her. He now had to look for it on his own. Their success had been enormous. Globally, more than 200,000 albums were sold. A position in the Billboard Classical Crossover Chart's top 10. They were crushing expectations. He took a step backward. He exercised. He got better. He tried to recall his initial passion for music. Supporters weren't happy with the breakup. The headlines were negative. She ditches him after he even reads it. It ached. They were a couple whom many had fallen in love with. They were unwilling to let go. Some insiders in the industry backed the solo deals. Others feared it was premature. In October 2013, they had recently released their second album, Perhaps Love, in the United States. The beginning, not the conclusion, was how it felt. Jonathan, however, wasn't done. He released Tenera, a collection of 12 classical songs, serious opera, in October 2014. The album peaked at number 1 on the official classical artist album chart. At the age of 19, he was the youngest tenor to ever reach the top of that list. Even more unexpectedly, the album rose to the 13th spot on the UK pop chart. This was a significant development. He was controlling rather than merely getting by on his own. That year, one instance jumped out. Jonathan received an invitation from one of the greatest tenors in history, Placido Domingo, to perform as his special guest at the London iTunes Festival. It was an indication that Jonathan had come as well as a moment of respect. Jonathan started working on his most ambitious project to date in 2020, a complete concept album. On June 5, Going the Distance became available. It was a 3-year project that Grammy winner Greg Field produced in partnership with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. This album wasn't like the others. The three acts of the narrative were based on Jonathan's personal trip. He performed Nessun Dorma, the aria that made Pavarotti famous, for the first time. As a final touch, a concert special with a full orchestra and choir was shown on PBS on March 15. Jonathan, now 25, was the entertainer that people had previously only dreamed he could be. Then, in 2024, he shocked everyone once more. This time, I'm asking for the Diane Warren Songbook, Volume 1, which has 8 tunes in only 33 minutes. Working together with Diane Warren, one of the biggest names in pop music. She's written for Lady Gaga, Aerosmith, Celine Dion, and now Jonathan. Jonathan Antoine was only 17 when he appeared on the stage of Britain's Got Talent in 2012. Overweight, shy, and trembling with anxiety, nobody anticipated what happened next. The world was shocked by his voice. He soared rather than merely sang. It was that one performance that transformed his life. The profound confusion and secret struggles he had endured for years, however, were never visible to the public. Furthermore, the truth would not be revealed for over 10 years. During an interview in Australia in the beginning of 2023, Jonathan revealed something he had never previously disclosed to the world. Autism was the diagnosis made for him. The announcement was made in late 2022, shortly after his 27th birthday. It seemed to him like a daydream. It was a surprise to those closest to him. Not even while he played all over the world or throughout his ascent to fame or after 5 successful albums had anyone suspected it. However, everything made sense after the diagnosis. Years of mental anguish, social concern, and perplexity suddenly had a reason. It wasn't a reason. Clarity was the answer. He wrote a statement on World Autism Awareness Day on Instagram that same year. He wrote about how the diagnosis altered his self-perception. He described it as freeing even if he acknowledged that it was frightening. For 28 years, Jonathan had to deal with incomprehensible difficulties. He battled feelings that were too overwhelming. The interviews left him exhausted. He fought against unrelenting pressure and criticism, particularly following his unexpected rise to stardom. He had been living with undiagnosed autism in silence during all of this. His public admission was met with an immediate and overwhelming response. His voice faltered during that same interview when he acknowledged that this was the first time he had discussed it in public. It was a comfort, he continued, to have a reason for all those challenging times. Life felt even more difficult because of how long it had been unknown. He was straightforward in his statement. He had been in the dark for 28 years. The suffering had always existed behind the scenes. From the age of 4, Jonathan had been teased because of his weight. The scrutiny only became more intense after BGT. Not only did the fame come quickly, but the criticism also did. He was frequently misinterpreted. He now sees that a lot of his difficulties were indicators of something more serious. Furthermore, the lack of early detection demonstrates how autism can be concealed among creative or talented individuals. Jonathan chose to speak up, however, not only for himself but also for others, rather than becoming mired in regret. He started promoting mental health and neurodiversity with his platform. He became a patron of juvenile brain tumor research and participated in promotions such as Make Some Noise, a classic FM song. He discussed openly on social media how autism impacts day-to-day living. He posted more than simply slogans. It felt like that, he explained. Like he had done for 28 years, he wanted to support those who might be going through difficult times in quiet. Millions of people heard him, therefore his remarks had weight. However, he continued on his own path. At the same time that he was accepting his autism, he was also undergoing physical changes. All Jonathan's life, he had battled his weight. When he first debuted on BGT, he weighed around 280 pounds, but he drastically changed his weight in the years that followed. In just 4 months after joining Weight Watchers in 2013, he shed almost 50 pounds. He eventually shed 70 pounds, or 5 stone, and maintained the weight loss. Though it wasn't only about looks, the change was so dramatic that fans occasionally failed to identify him in pictures. The goal was to feel more in control and healthier. An unidentified thyroid problem was a major contributing factor to his previous weight loss struggles. When the physicians discovered it, everything was different. It finally made sense to him why it had always been so hard to lose weight. He took advantage of the boost that came from managing the thyroid condition. He established a hallowed daily routine. He decided to walk 10,000 steps a day starting on January 12. He hasn't missed more than 2 days since. He kept to his plan regardless of where he was or what he had to do. He would even pace in one place to achieve his objective. Walking was more than just exercise to him. It allowed him to take control of his life. It used up calories. His mind was freed. Additionally, it provided him with structure. On certain days, it was the only thing that gave him a sense of control. "I feel stronger and healthier than I have in 10 years, he added. He had not felt this wonderful since the beginning of his career, according to this. Although there are still more objectives for him to accomplish, he is doing it with greater power, clarity, and serenity. Taking control of his health also aided in his emotional recovery. It was more than just a scale of numbers. After years of feeling helpless, it was time to fight back. Jonathan discovered love in a very surprising way through it all. Using a web chat service, he connected with Canadian waitress Michelle Doucette. He was lost in the beginning of their relationship. After splitting from Charlotte Giaconelli, his longtime duet partner, he was attempting to discover his identity as a solo performer. Michelle supported and stabilized him. She became his inspiration and gave him the confidence he needed. Even his album, Belief, was inspired by her, and he publicly referred to her as the source of his happiness. Despite living in different nations, Michelle frequently went from Canada to help Jonathan. In 2016, their romance was made public when they attended Florence Foster Jenkins's film premiere together. Michelle was more than simply a supporting character. She actively contributed to Jonathan's creative process. She fully understood him, he said. His job responsibilities and the emotional burden of his autism diagnosis made that support even more invaluable. In the meantime, he lost contact with Charlotte. In a 2017 interview, Jonathan stated that they seldom ever speak now, answering a common question from fans. "There isn't time for old friendships when you're working non-stop," he explained. Following a meeting with Sony, where they were unable to agree on tracks for a third album, they broke up. In the end, the label recommended working on solo projects. Their decision-making process took a month and was emotionally charged. However, once they did, there was no turning back. Jonathan is now getting ready to share his entire story on screen. They are working on a documentary on his life. The project, which may be titled Beyond the High Sea, is headed by David J. Baird and is scheduled to start production in 2023 or 2024. It will examine Jonathan's childhood experiences of severe bullying and trace his path from loneliness to widespread recognition. Including video from his early career and details on his current diagnosis, the movie promises to show the public things they have never seen before. Perhaps it's the most comprehensive portrait of Jonathan ever created. Jonathan has established a remarkable career despite all of his personal struggles. As of right present, his estimated net worth is $4 million. There are more than 64 million views on his YouTube channel. Ad revenue from that alone has been close to $190,000. Over 50,000 Spotify users routinely listen to his music streaming each month. Both of his solo albums, Believe and Tenore, peaked at #1 on the UK classical charts. Throughout it all, he never lost sight of his classical roots. His art was not traded for instant celebrity. He remained authentic.